나는 네 개가 아니다.
Now, we'll never set you free.
The scent of expensive whiskey and cold, calculated malice always announced the presence of the Kong twins before they even walked through the door of the Velvet Grotto. The October air in San Francisco was biting, a thick fog rolling off the bay like a shroud, but inside the exclusive lounge, the atmosphere was suffocating for a different reason. Aria Thompson moved through the dimly lit room with the grace of a woman who had spent 5 years learning how to be a ghost. At 26, her dark skin was a canvas of cool composure, her eyes trained to see everything while appearing to see nothing. She smoothed her silk uniform, her heart hammering a rhythm she refused to acknowledge. Tonight, the air felt electric, charged with a tension that made the hair on her arms stand up. The Kong twins had arrived. Daehyun and Ju-won Kong didn't just enter a room, they owned the oxygen within it. They were the heirs to the Kang Syndicate, a shadow empire rooted in the high-tech corridors of Pangeo and the deep-water ports of Busan. At 30, they were identical in their devastating beauty, sharp jawlines, eyes like obsidian glass, and an aura of predatory elegance. But where Daehyun was a silent storm, Ju-won was the lightning strike. They took the corner booth, the one that offered a clear view of every exit, and the room went quiet. Powerful men lowered their voices. The music seemed to dim in their presence. Arya approached with a tray of crystal glasses, her face a mask of professional neutrality. She had heard the stories. Everyone in the Bay Area knew that the twins ran the import-export business on paper, but the reality was written in the blood of those who crossed them. She set the glasses down with a steady hand, her movements precise. Single malt, neat, Ju-won said, his voice a low vibration that seemed to rake over Arya's skin. He didn't look at her. He was staring at his brother, a smirk playing on his lips. I was telling my brother that the service in the city has become lackluster. It's hard to find someone who knows their place. Arya poured the whiskey, the amber liquid catching the amber light of the chandeliers. She remained silent, just as she had been taught. Look at her, Ju-won continued, switching to a sharp, rapid-fire Korean, his tone dripping with a condescension that felt like a physical slap. Like a well-trained mare. Silent, dark, and utterly obedient. They all have that look, don't they? Like they're just waiting for a command because they don't have a thought of their own. Daehyun didn't laugh, but his silence was an endorsement. He watched Arya, his gaze heavy and analytical, like he was looking for a flaw in her armor. Arya's hand didn't shake, but inside, something ancient and fierce ignited. She had spent a decade burying her past, running from the memory of her father, a man who had been a linguist for the government before he vanished into the shadows of a deep cover assignment in Busan. He had taught her Korean before she could even ride a bike. He had taught her that a language was a map to a person's soul, and once you understood the map, you could never be lost. She set the bottle down. The silence in the booth was thick, expectant. Ju-won reached out, his fingers grazing the back of her hand as he took the glass, a gesture meant to assert dominance. Stay close, sweetheart, Ju-won said in English, his eyes mocking. We might need something else to keep us entertained. Arya didn't pull her hand away. Instead, she leaned in, her voice a silk thread that cut through the jazz and the clink of ice. In flawless, native-level Korean, seasoned with the rough, aggressive lilt of a Busan shipyard worker, she spoke. I'm not a mare, and I certainly don't take commands from men who use their tongues to hide the fact that they have no spine. She met Ju-won's eyes, her gaze unflinching. If you want entertainment, go to a circus. If you want a drink, shut your mouth and show some respect for the hands that feed you. Because right now, you aren't the hunters. You're just two loudmouth boys in expensive suits. The world stopped. The ice in Ju-won's glass seemed to freeze mid-melt. Daehyun's eyes narrowed, a flash of genuine shock breaking through his icy exterior. The men at the nearby tables went still, their forks suspended in midair. The silence was so absolute it felt like a physical weight, pressing against Arya's chest. Ju-won stood slowly, his height looming over her, his shadow swallowing her whole. He didn't look angry. He looked fascinated, the way a scientist might look at a new, dangerous species. He reached out, his hand wrapping around the back of her neck, his thumb pressing against her pulse point. What did you just say to me? He whispered, his voice a dangerous purr. I think you heard me clearly, Arya replied, her voice steady even as her heart threatened to beat out of her chest. Or do I need to repeat it in a dialect your grandmother would understand? Ju-won's grip tightened, not enough to bruise, but enough to remind her that he could snap her neck with a single twist. You have no idea what you've just done, Arya. I know exactly what I've done, she whispered back. I've reminded you that I'm a human being, not a mare, not a servant, a woman. Dae-hyun stood then, his presence even more commanding than his brother's. He looked at the manager, who was approaching with a face as white as a ghost. She's finished for the night, Dae-hyun said, his voice leaving no room for argument. And don't bother with her final check. We'll be taking care of her from here. You can't do that, the manager stammered. We can do whatever we want, Ju-won said, his eyes never leaving Arya's. He leaned down, his lips brushing against her ear. We will never set you free after this, Arya. You've made yourself the most interesting thing in this city, and we don't like to lose our toys. He threw a stack of $1,000 bills onto the table and began to lead her out. Arya didn't fight. She knew that in a city like San Francisco, in a world like theirs, fighting only made the predator more excited. She looked back at the room, at the people who had watched her for years without ever seeing her, and realized that her life of invisibility had just ended in a blaze of defiance. The black SUV moved through the streets of San Francisco like a ghost ship. Arya sat in the back between the two brothers, the scent of leather and expensive cologne filling her lungs. Neither of them spoke. The silence was a weapon, meant to break her, but she stared out the window at the fog-drenched hills, her jaw set. Who taught you? Dae-hyun asked eventually, his voice quiet. He was looking at her now, his eyes tracing the line of her profile. My father, Arya said. He believed that knowing a language was the only way to truly understand an enemy. And am I your enemy, Arya? Ju-won asked, leaning closer, his knee brushing against hers. You're a man who thinks money and blood make him a god, she said, turning to look at him. In my world, that's exactly what an enemy looks like. Ju-won laughed, a sharp, genuine sound. I like her, brother. She's got teeth. Teeth can be pulled, Dae-hyun said, but his eyes didn't match the coldness of his words. There was a spark of something else there, a curiosity that felt like a spark in a dry forest. They pulled into the gates of a massive estate in Pacific Heights, a fortress of glass and steel that overlooked the dark waters of the bay. The gates hissed shut behind them, a sound that felt like the closing of a tomb. Arya was led through the house, her eyes taking in the clinical luxury, the original artwork, the marble floors, the guards who stood at every corner like statues. They reached a massive suite at the top of the house. Ju-won opened the door and gestured for her to enter. This is your cage for now, he said. It has everything you need. Clothes, food, a view of the city you'll never walk through alone again. Arya walked to the center of the room, turning to face them. Why? Just because I insulted you? Your ego can't be that fragile. It's not about the insult, Dae-hyun said, stepping into the room. It's about the fact that you looked at us and didn't see the monsters everyone else sees. You saw the men. And you spoke to us in a voice that sounds like home. I spoke to you in a voice that sounds like the people you crush under your boots, Arya countered. Ju-won moved toward her, his movements fluid and dangerous. He caught a lock of her hair, twining it around his finger. You're wrong, Arya. You spoke to us in the voice of the only person who ever dared to tell us the truth. Our grandmother. He leaned in, his eyes dark with a sudden, raw intensity. She told us that one day, we would find a woman who wouldn't bow. She told us that woman would be our salvation or our destruction. Which one am I? Arya whispered, her heart pounding against her ribs. We haven't decided yet, Dae-hyun said from the doorway. But we're going to have a lot of time to find out. Because like my brother said, we will never set you free. As the door clicked shut and the lock turned, Arya walked to the window. The lights of San Francisco glittered below, a million lives she was no longer a part of. She pressed her hand against the cold glass and whispered in Korean, I'm sorry, Papa. I tried to stay hidden, but I think I've just walked into the heart of the storm. Besties, would you stay or would you fight? The tension is just beginning to boil. Subscribe now and join us to see where the psychological games begin and the heat between Arya and the twins reaches a breaking point. The heavy thud of the mahogany door echoed like a gavel in the silence of the suite. Arya stood perfectly still, her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows a ghost against the backdrop of the San Francisco skyline. She didn't move until she heard their footsteps retreat, the distinct, rhythmic stride of two men who moved in perfect synchronicity. Only then did she let out the breath she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was a cold, sharp blade. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a variable in a high-stakes equation she didn't yet understand. The suite was a masterpiece of cold, expensive taste, silk rugs, charcoal velvet, and air that smelled of ozone and sandalwood. It was a prison designed by architects. Arya walked to the closet and pulled it open. Row after row of designer clothes in her exact size hung there like silk corpses. They had been planning this. Or perhaps they were simply so used to owning people that they kept a stock of cages ready. She grabbed a heavy silk robe, wrapping it around herself as if it were armor. She wouldn't be their doll. The door opened again an hour later. Ju-won walked in alone, his suit jacket gone, the sleeves of his white shirt rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and a glimpse of a black ink tattoo, a tiger's tail disappearing under his cuff. He carried a tray with a single bowl of steaming dakjuk. The scent of ginger and toasted sesame oil filled the room, a smell that sat violently at odds with the predatory look in his eyes. "Eat," he commanded, setting the tray on the marble coffee table. Arya didn't move from the window. "I'm not hungry." "You haven't eaten since your shift started 8 hours ago," Ju-won said, his voice dropping an octave. He crossed the room, his presence shrinking the space until she felt the heat radiating off him. "Insolence is exhausting, Arya. You need your strength if you plan on surviving us." "Is that what this is? A survival game?" She turned to face him, her chin tilted up. "What happens if I win? Do I get my life back, or do I just get a bigger cage?" Ju-won reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw with a terrifying tenderness. His touch was electric, a spark that made her skin prickle with a mixture of fear and a traitorous, unwanted heart. "There is no winning, Arya. There is only belonging. You sparked something in my brother tonight. Something I haven't seen in years. He's the quiet one, the one who thinks 10 moves ahead. And right now, all he's thinking about is how your voice sounded when you told us to shut our mouths." Arya pulled away from his touch. "I spoke the truth. You act like kings in a city that doesn't belong to you." Ju-won's eyes flashed, a predatory glint reflecting the city lights. "This city belongs to whoever has the stomach to take it. But you speak Busan Korean like you were born in the salt air. Your father wasn't just a linguist, was he? No ordinary teacher can capture the grit of the docks." He stepped closer, pinning her against the glass. "Who is he really? And why did he hide a weapon like you in a dive bar?" "He wasn't hiding me," Arya whispered, her breath hitching as Ju-won leaned in, his scent, expensive tobacco and cold, overwhelming her. "He was protecting me from men like you." "He failed," Ju-won murmured, his lips inches from hers. "Because now you're exactly where you were always meant to be. Between us." The door opened and Dae-hyun stepped in. The atmosphere shifted instantly. If Ju-won was fire, Dae-hyun was the deep, freezing ocean. He looked at his twin, then at Arya, his expression unreadable. "The police are asking questions at the club," Dae-hyun said, his voice a calm contrast to the tension in the room. "The manager is talking about a kidnapping." "Let them talk," Ju-won said, finally stepping back from Arya, though his eyes remained locked on hers. "We have the mayor in our pocket and the chief of police on our payroll. A waitress disappearing from a lounge isn't a crime. It's an administrative error." Arya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. These men didn't just break the law, they edited it to suit their needs. She looked at Dae-hyun, the brother who had remained mostly silent. "You're the strategist. Tell me, what's the end goal? You can't keep me here forever." Dae-hyun walked over, picking up the spoon from the tray. He stirred the porridge slowly. "Forever is a long time, Arya. But long enough for you to tell us where the files are." Arya's heart skipped a beat. She kept her face a mask of confusion. "What files?" Dae-hyun stopped stirring. He looked up, his obsidian eyes boring into hers with a surgical intensity. "Your father didn't just disappear. He fled. He took a ledger from the Kang Syndicate in Busan 15 years ago. A ledger that contains the digital keys to our family's offshore holdings. We've been looking for his bloodline for a decade. We didn't find you because you insulted us, Arya. We found you because the moment you spoke that dialect, your DNA did the talking for you. The room went cold. The insult at the bar hadn't been the cause of her kidnapping, it had been the confirmation. Arya felt the walls closing in. Her father had always told her, the language is a bridge, Arya, but some bridges are meant to be burned. I don't know anything about a ledger, she lied, her voice steady. Ju-won gripped her waist, pulling her flush against him. We don't like liars, sweetheart. But we do love a challenge. We're going to keep you here, and every day you don't give us what we want, the cage gets smaller. Or, he leaned down, his voice a dark promise, the methods get more intimate. You're monsters, Arya spat. Daehyun stepped closer, the two brothers flanking her, their twin shadows merging into one massive silhouette against the window. We are the men your father robbed, Daehyun said. And in our world, debts are paid in blood. Or in beauty. Before we find out if Arya breaks under the pressure of the twins' dark interrogation, make sure you're subscribed. This story is moving into dangerous territory, and you don't want to be left in the dark. If you think Arya should find a way to escape, type run in the comments. If you think she should stay and fight them from the inside, type rain. Your engagement keeps this story alive. You'll never get it, Arya said, her voice echoing in the vast room. My father died protecting that information. You think you can scare me into giving up the only thing he had left? Ju-won's hand moved from her waist to her hair, tilting her head back to look at him. Fear isn't the only way to make a woman talk, Arya. There's pleasure. There's obsession. There's the way your heart is racing right now, not just because you're scared, but because you've never been looked at by men who actually see you. I see a killer, she whispered. You see a mirror, Daehyun countered, reaching out to brush a stray tear from her cheek with his thumb. You have the same fire in you that we have. You were born for this world, not for serving drinks to pathetic men in suits. You're a Kang Syndicate secret, Arya. And we're just bringing you home. Daehyun turned to his brother. Search her things. Every stitch of clothing she arrived in. If the key isn't on her, it's in that apartment she's been hiding in. I've already sent Marcus to clear the apartment, Ju-won said. By morning, it will look like Arya Thompson never existed. Arya felt a wave of nausea. Her life, her books, her photos, her father's old watch, everything was being erased. She was being stripped of her identity, peeled back until only the daughter of a thief remained. You can't erase me, she said, her voice cracking. We aren't erasing you, Ju-won said, his voice dropping to a seductive whisper. We're perfecting you. You're going to stay in this room. You're going to eat when we tell you. And you're going to talk when we make you. He let go of her suddenly, the loss of his heat making her shiver. The brothers walked toward the door, their movements identical, a terrifying display of unity. Rest, Arya, Daehyun said, his hand on the light switch. Tomorrow, the real work begins. And remember, the windows are reinforced. The door is steel. And the guards have orders to shoot anyone who isn't a Kang. The lights went out, plunging the room into the glow of the city. Arya stood in the dark, the scent of the porridge still lingering in the air like a taunt. She walked to the door and tried the handle. Locked. She went to the window and pressed her forehead against the glass. Deep in her mind, a memory surfaced. Her father, sitting at a small wooden table in a cramped apartment in Busan, whispering to her as a storm raged outside. Arya, if they ever find you, don't use the language to fight. Use it to weave a web. If you can't outrun the tigers, you must make them believe you are the one holding the leash. She closed her eyes, a single tear falling. I'm not a dog, she whispered to the empty room. And I'm not a toy. I'm the one who's going to burn your empire to the ground. Besties, the twins think they have her trapped, but the psychological war is only just beginning. The heat is about to explode, and a massive secret about Arya's father is about to be revealed. The morning sun didn't rise over Pacific Heights. It pierced through the fog like a golden spear, illuminating the luxury that felt more like a tomb. Arya hadn't slept. She had spent the night mapping the room, testing the seams of the wallpaper and tracing the vents. She was looking for a ghost, the ghost of her father's brilliance. The door hissed open, and the brothers walked in. They were dressed in matching charcoal suits, looking every bit the princes of a tech empire, but the way they moved was all Busan underworld, shoulders broad, eyes scanning for threats. Daehyun held a leather-bound folder, while Ju-won carried a small, velvet-lined box. "You look tired," Arya, Ju-won said, his voice mocking. He set the box on the table. "Did the city lights keep you up? Or was it the realization that you're finally home?" "This isn't my home. This is a crime scene," Arya snapped, her voice raspy. Daehyun ignored the barb, opening the folder to reveal a series of surveillance photos. Arya's heart stopped. They were photos of her father, Mitch Thompson, or whatever his real name was, taken in the weeks before he died. He looked haggard, looking over his shoulder in every frame. "We tracked him to a small town outside of Incheon," Daehyun said, his voice cold and clinical. "He was clever. He used 3 different aliases, lived in a basement, and never used the same phone twice. But he made one mistake. He kept a photo of you in his wallet. A photo of a little girl in a yellow dress, standing in front of a cherry blossom tree in Busan." Arya felt a lump in her throat. She remembered that day. It was the last time she had felt truly safe. "When we finally caught up to him," Ju-won said, stepping into her personal space, his hand reaching out to tilt her chin up, "he didn't have the ledger. He told us it was somewhere safe. Somewhere only his blood could reach." "I don't have it," Arya whispered, her eyes burning. "He never gave me anything but the language." "Then why did you have this hidden behind a loose brick in your fireplace?" Ju-won opened the velvet box. Inside lay a heavy silver ring, engraved with the image of a dragon coiling around a black pearl. Arya's breath hitched. She hadn't seen that ring since she was 10. Her father had told her it was a family heirloom, something to be kept secret until she returned to Korea. "This is the seal of the 3rd branch," Daehyun said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "It's not just a ring, Arya. It's a key. It grants access to the private vaults in the Haeundae district of Busan. Vaults that haven't been opened in 15 years. If you have the ring, why do you need me?" Arya asked, her pulse hammering against her skin where Ju-won's fingers rested. "Because the vault is biolocked," Ju-won murmured, his lips dangerously close to hers. "It doesn't just need the ring. It needs the DNA of the man who stole it. Or the DNA of his only child." The room spun. They weren't just keeping her for the ledger. They were keeping her because she was the literal key to their family's lost fortune. She was a biological tool to them. "We're leaving for Busan tonight," Daehyun announced. "You'll travel on our private jet. You'll be under heavy sedation for the flight. For your own comfort, of course." "I'm not going back there," Arya said, her voice rising in panic. "You don't have a choice," Ju-won said, his grip on her chin tightening. "You're a king now, Arya. Whether you like it or not. You belong to the syndicate. You belong to us." He leaned in, his scent of bergamot and danger filling her senses. "And once we open that vault, once we have what we want, we'll decide what to do with the girl who has her father's eyes and a tongue like a Busan knife." "I'll kill you before I help you," Arya spat. Daehyun stepped forward, his expression softening into something far more terrifying than anger. It was obsession. "Many have tried, Arya. But no one has ever looked as beautiful as you do while saying it. Before the twins take Arya across the ocean to the heart of their empire, you need to be part of the inner circle. Subscribe now and hit that like button to show these Mafia dons that Arya Thompson isn't standing alone. Comment Busan if you want to see the twins' world in Korea. Your support is the only thing keeping the heat turned up." The flight was a blur of luxury and lethargy. The sedation left Arya in a dreamlike state, her head lolling against Ju-won's shoulder as the jet cut through the clouds. She felt his hand in hers, his fingers tracing her palm, a gesture that felt disturbingly like a promise. When she finally woke, the air was different. It was saltier, thicker, filled with the hum of a city that never truly slept. They were in a sprawling villa overlooking Haeundae Beach, the lights of the diamond bridge glittering in the distance like a fallen constellation. Arya sat up in the massive bed, her head throbbing. She was dressed in a traditional silk hanbok, but the colors were dark charcoal and deep crimson. A queen's colors. Daehyun was standing on the balcony, his back to her. He turned as she moved, his obsidian eyes unreadable. "Welcome home, Arya." "This isn't my home," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. It's a beautiful cage in a different country. Is it? Daehyun walked toward her, his movements slow and deliberate. Look at the jewelry on the vanity. The jade is from the Gyeonggi province. The silk is from the best looms in Daegu. Our father spent his life trying to erase your father's legacy. We're doing the opposite. We're restoring it. By kidnapping me? By claiming what is ours, Ju-won said, stepping out from the shadows of the hallway. He looked different here, more at home, more lethal. In San Francisco, we had to pretend to be businessmen. Here, we are the Kong twins. We are the law. He walked to the bed and sat beside her, his hand moving to the back of her neck, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin there. Tonight, we go to the vault. You'll provide the sample. You'll open the door. And then, we'll celebrate. Celebrate what? My father's betrayal. Arya asked, her eyes flashing. Celebrate the end of the war, Daehyun said, standing at the foot of the bed. And the beginning of your new life. You think we only want the ledger, Arya? You're wrong. We want the woman who can look at us and see through the masks. We want the fire you carry. Ju-won leaned in, his breath hot against her ear. You think you hate us, Arya. But I saw the way you looked at me on the plane. I felt the way your heart sped up when I touched you. You're drawn to the darkness because you have it in you too. I'm nothing like you, she whispered, though her body betrayed her, a shiver running down her spine. We'll see, Ju-won murmured. Tonight, the vault opens. And everything changes. He stood, gesturing for her to follow. The cars are waiting. Don't make us use force, Arya. We'd much rather you walk through those doors as our guest than our prisoner. As they moved through the villa, Arya saw the sheer scale of their power. Dozens of men in dark suits bowed as they passed. This wasn't just a mafia, it was a kingdom. They reached a nondescript building in the heart of the district, an underground bunker reinforced with layers of steel and sensors. They descended deep into the earth, the temperature dropping with every floor. The vault door was a masterpiece of engineering, a massive disc of reinforced titanium. In the center was a small glass panel. Place your hand on the sensor, Daehyun commanded. Arya looked at the door, then at the twins. They were watching her with an intensity that felt like physical heat. She knew that once this door opened, she would lose her only leverage. But she also knew that if she refused, she might not survive the night. She placed her hand on the cold glass. A red light swept over her skin. A sharp prick at her fingertip drew a tiny bead of blood. Identity confirmed, bloodline match, a mechanical voice announced. The sound of massive gears shifting echoed through the chamber. The vault door began to rotate, a hiss of pressurized air escaping. Ju-won gripped her waist, pulling her back as the door swung open. Here we go, he whispered. But as the lights inside the vault flickered on, the twins froze. The vault wasn't filled with gold or ledgers. It was filled with hundreds of monitors, all showing live feeds of the Kang Syndicate's operations across the globe. And in the center of the room was a single, high-tech terminal with a blinking message on the screen. Hello, daughter. I knew they would bring you here. Press the red button to finish what I started. Arya's heart hammered. Her father hadn't stolen the money. He had built a kill switch for their entire empire. Beautiful people, the twins are paralyzed by the discovery. What happens when Arya realizes she has the power to destroy them with one finger? Besties, subscribe now and share this video. The world needs to see the moment where the waitress becomes the master. The blue light from the terminal reflected in Arya's wide eyes, casting her face in a ghostly, electric hue. The air in the vault was cold, colder than the San Francisco fog, colder than the obsidian stares of the men flanking her. Behind her, she felt the twins' posture shift from triumphant to predatory. The realization that they had been lured into a trap set by a dead man was beginning to sink in. Arya, Daehyun's voice was a low warning, a rumble of thunder before the storm. Step away from the console. Now. Is this what you were looking for? Arya whispered, her finger hovering inches above the glowing red prompt. My father didn't rob you. He mapped you. Every shell company, every shipping route, every bribe paid to every official in Busan and Pangeo. It's all here. Ju-won moved with the speed of a strike team leader, his hand clamping around Arya's wrist before she could move. He didn't pull her away, he pinned her against the terminal, his chest heaving against her back. You think he did this to save you? Ju-won hissed into her ear, his voice raw with a sudden, jagged edge. He used you as a lure. He knew we'd need your blood to get in here. He sacrificed his daughter to bury his enemies. He gave me a choice. Arya shouted, turning her head to glare at him, their faces so close she could feel the heat of his fury. Something you two don't understand. He gave me the power to decide if you deserve to exist. Daehyun stepped into the light, his face a mask of terrifying calm. He pulled a small device from his pocket, a signal jammer, and flipped the switch. The monitors flickered but remained live. The system is hardwired into the city's power grid, Ju-won. He didn't just build a kill switch, he built a bomb. If she presses that button, every server we own wipes. Our assets in Daegu, our ports in Busan, it all vanishes. We'll be nothing but two men in a basement with a lot of enemies. Then we make sure she doesn't press it, Ju-won said, his grip on her wrist tightening until she gasped. He spun her around, forcing her to face him. Look at me, Arya. You think you're the hero here? If this empire falls, 30,000 people lose their livelihoods. The power vacuum will be filled by men 10 times worse than us. Your father wasn't a saint. He was a vengeful ghost who didn't care who he burned. Arya's breath was shallow. The psychological weight of the moment was crushing. She looked from Ju-won's desperate fire to Daehyun's cold calculation. For the first time, she saw a crack in their armor. They weren't just Mafia dons. They were men terrified of losing the only thing that gave them identity. You said I belong to you, Arya said, her voice trembling but clear. If I belong to you, then my father's legacy belongs to me. And I'm not my father. Then prove it, Daehyun said, stepping closer, his obsidian eyes searching hers. Step away. Let us secure the data. We will give you anything you want. Wealth, freedom, the truth about what happened the night he died. Just don't destroy us. Freedom? Arya laughed, a jagged, hollow sound. You've spent the last 48 hours telling me you'll never set me free. Why should I believe a lie now? Ju-won's expression softened, a look of agonized sincerity crossing his handsome features. He let go of her wrist and instead cupped her face, his thumbs brushing over her cheekbones. Because we can't let you go now, Arya. Not because of the ledger, but because you're the only person in the world who holds our lives in her hands. That's not a prisoner, Arya. That's a queen. The intensity in the room was suffocating. Arya could feel the magnetic pull of them, the twins, two halves of a dark hole, offering her a throne built on the ruins of her old life. She looked back at the screen. The red button continued to blink. Press to finish. I want to see the files first, Arya said. I want to know why he really fled. Daehyun nodded slowly, reaching past her to tap a command into the keyboard. The main monitor shifted, scrolling through thousands of pages of encrypted data until it stopped on a folder titled Project Harpy. Arya's blood ran cold as she read the first page. Her father hadn't been a victim. He had been the lead architect of the very trafficking system he eventually tried to destroy. He hadn't fled out of righteousness. He had fled because he had been passed over for a promotion within the syndicate and decided to take the keys to the kingdom with him. He didn't save those women, Arya whispered, her heart shattering as the image of her hero, father, dissolved. He sold them. He was a King before he was a Thompson, Ju-won said quietly, his hand resting on her shoulder. He was our uncle's favorite protege. Until he got greedy. Arya collapsed against the console, the weight of the betrayal making her knees buckle. Everything she had believed, the reason she spoke the language, the reason she stayed invisible, was a lie. She wasn't the daughter of a hero. She was the daughter of a monster who had taught her to speak the language of the people he exploited so she could hide in plain sight. Ju-won pulled her into his arms, and this time, Arya didn't fight. She felt hollowed out, a shell of a woman whose foundation had turned to sand. We're the same, Arya, he murmured into her hair. Born from the same blood, the same darkness. Don't punish us for his sins. Help us build something better. Better. She looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed. You're still Mafia. We are what we have to be to survive, Daehyun said, standing over them like a dark sentinel. But with you, with the data your father collected, we can purge the old guard. We can turn the syndicate into something that doesn't need to hide in the shadows of warehouses. He reached out his hand to her. The red button doesn't have to be a bomb, Arya. It can be a reset. If you enter your biometric key again, we can reroute the data to a private server. We can use it to take down the men who encouraged your father's worst instincts. The men who are currently planning to kill us the moment we walk out of this vault. Arya looked at Daehyun's outstretched hand, then at Ju-won, who was watching her with a hunger that wasn't just about power. It was about her. They were offering her a partnership in a war she didn't ask for, but one she was uniquely qualified to fight. If I do this, Arya said, her voice hardening, I'm not a toy. I'm not a guest. And you will never, ever call me a mare again. Ju-won smiled, a dangerous, beautiful curve of his lips. I think you've proven you're the one holding the leash, sweetheart. Arya stood up, her movements graceful and determined. She turned back to the terminal. Her fingers flew across the keys, the Busan dialect she had practiced her whole life appearing in the coding language her father had taught her in secret. She wasn't just entering a key, she was rewriting the script. What are you doing? Daehyun asked, leaning in, his eyes tracking the code. I'm not just rerouting the data, Arya said. I'm setting a timer. If my heart rate drops below 60, or if I don't enter a code every 24 hours, the original kill switch activates. You want me? You have to keep me alive. And you have to keep me happy. Ju-won laughed, a deep, rich sound that echoed off the titanium walls. She's a genius. I told you she had teeth, brother. Daehyun didn't laugh. He looked at Arya with a profound, terrifying respect. He walked over and pressed his forehead against hers, a gesture of intimacy that felt more binding than a contract. You've just ensured that we will never set you free, Arya. Not because we want to own you, but because we can't survive without you. Good, Arya whispered. Then let's go tell your enemies that the rules have changed. As the vault door began to hiss shut, locking them inside the belly of the beast, Arya felt a strange sense of peace. The invisibility was gone. The waitress was dead. In her place stood a woman who had looked into the abyss and realized the twins were just waiting for her to lead them through it. Besties, the twins are now tied to Arya's very heartbeat. But out in the streets of Busan, a rival faction is already moving in. Can Arya handle the physical heat of a mafia war as well as the emotional heat between her and the twins? Tell me what you think in the comments section. The heavy titanium door sealed with a final, echoing boom, leaving the three of them in the humming silence of the underground bunker. The blue light of the terminal danced across Arya's skin, but it was no longer the light of her father's ghost, it was the glow of her own sovereignty. She turned to the twins, her chest rising and falling in shallow, jagged breaths. The power shift was so palpable the air felt thick enough to bruise. The timer is live, Arya said, her voice dropping into that low, Busan-inflected rasp that always made Ju-won's eyes darken. My life is now the only thing standing between your empire and total annihilation. I suggest you start treating me like the floor I walk on is paved in gold. Ju-won didn't move back. If anything, he pressed closer, his hand sliding up from her waist to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in the dark silk of her hair. You think you've scared us? He whispered, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. You've just made the game worth playing. I've spent 30 years looking for a woman who could hold a gun to my head and make me want to thank her for the privilege. It's not a game, Ju-won, Arya countered, though her pulse betrayed her, hammering against the palm he had pressed to her heart. Daehyun stepped forward, his cold, analytical gaze sweeping over them both. He reached out and grabbed Arya's other hand, his touch cool and grounding. The adrenaline is high, but the reality is coming. My uncle's men are likely already surrounding this building. They expected us to come out with a ledger, not a queen who has wired our souls to her heartbeat. He looked at his twin. We need to get her back to the villa in Houndy. We can't protect her in a bunker. I can protect myself, Arya snapped, though she didn't pull her hands away. Not from a sniper at 300 yards, Daehyun said, his voice dropping into a register of grim protectiveness. From this moment on, you don't breathe without one of us inhaling for you. You don't move without our shadows covering yours. The journey back to the villa was a blur of high-speed armored cars and the rhythmic clicking of safeties being switched off. Arya sat between them in the back seat, the silence heavy with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. On her left, Ju-won was a coiled spring, his hand resting on his weapon, his eyes scanning the neon-drenched streets of Busan. On her right, Daehyun was staring at her, his mind clearly working through 1,000 tactical permutations. When they arrived at the villa, the security was doubled. Men in black tactical gear stood like stone sentinels among the manicured pines and rock gardens. The twins led her up to the master wing, a sprawling expanse of glass, dark wood, and silk that looked out over the churning black waters of the Sea of Japan. "You'll sleep here," Daehyun said, gesturing to the massive bed. "With us." Arya froze. "I agreed to help you run the syndicate." "I didn't agree to this." Ji-won stripped off his suit jacket, tossing it onto a chair. He began unbuttoning his shirt, his obsidian eyes never leaving hers. "The timer is tied to your heart rate, Arya. If you have a nightmare, if your pulse spikes or drops while you're alone, the alarms go off. The system thinks you're being tortured or killed. We stay close to keep you calm. To keep the system stable." "That's a lie," Arya whispered, even as her body reacted to the sight of his broad shoulders and the intricate dragon tattoo that coiled up his neck. "You just want to keep me under your thumb." "I want to hear you breathe," Ji-won corrected, stepping into her space until she was forced back against the silk headboard. "I want to know that the most dangerous woman in Korea is safe in my arms. Before the heat in the villa turns into a total inferno, you need to lock in. Subscribe now and hit that like button." We're deep in the heart of Busan now, and the lines between prisoner and partner are blurring into nothingness. Comment twins if you're Team Ji-won and Daehyun, or Arya if you think she's playing them both. Don't miss the next move. Daehyun joined them, his movements more graceful, more deliberate. He sat on the other side of the bed, watching the way Ji-won's shadow fell over Arya. "We aren't the monsters your father described, Arya. But we aren't saints either. We've spent our lives sharing everything, our empire, our secrets, our blood. And now we share the woman who holds the key to it all." He reached out, his hand sliding over the silk of her hanbok, tracing the curve of her hip. "You called us boys in expensive suits. Tonight, we'll show you what it means to be the men who own the city you once fled." Arya felt trapped, not by the walls of the villa, but by the sheer, overwhelming magnetism of the two men. It was psychological warfare wrapped in silk. They were stripping away her defenses, making her crave the very men she should be running from. "If I stay," Arya said, her voice trembling, "it's on my terms. I want to see the accounts. I want to know exactly which officials are on the payroll. If I'm the heart of this syndicate, I'm going to make sure it beats for something other than cruelty." A reformer, Ji-won chuckled, his lips grazing her jawline. "I've always liked a girl with a project. Fine. Tomorrow, you see the books. Tomorrow, you start cleaning the house. But tonight." He leaned in, his voice a dark, velvet promise. "Tonight, the world stops at that door." The night was a fevered dream of tension and touch. Arya lay between them, the heat of their bodies like twin suns. Ji-won was behind her, his arm draped over her waist, his breath steady against the nape of her neck. Daehyun was in front of her, his hand holding hers, his thumb tracing circles on her palm as he watched her in the moonlight. "Why me?" Arya whispered into the darkness. "There are 1,000 women in Busan who would kill to be in this bed. Women who know your world. Because those women see the Kang name," Daehyun's voice came through the gloom, low and honest. "They see the power. You saw the dog. You saw the flaw. You looked at us and didn't blink. And because," Ji-won added, his grip on her waist tightening slightly, "you're the only one who ever made us feel like we had something to lose." Arya closed her eyes, the salt air of Busan drifting in through the cracked balcony door. She was in the heart of the storm, tucked between the two most dangerous men in the country, and for the first time in 15 years, she didn't feel like she was hiding. She felt like she was being forged. But as the twins fell into a light, watchful sleep, Arya's eyes snapped open. She looked at the terminal she had brought from the bunker, now sitting on the nightstand. A message was flickering in the corner of the screen, one she hadn't seen before. "Source detected, Uncle Kong." Signal originating from inside the villa. Her heart plummeted. One of their own men was a traitor. The uncle who had helped her father sell those women was already inside the house, and he didn't want the ledger. He wanted Arya dead, so the timer would expire and the twins would be wiped out in the fallout. She looked at the sleeping men beside her. If she woke them, the traitor might strike. If she didn't, they were all dead. Arya is in the lion's den, and the lion's own pride is about to turn on them. Besties, who is the traitor? And can Arya save the twins before the villa becomes a slaughterhouse? Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comment section. The action is about to explode, and Arya will have to use her Busan knife skills for more than just words. You cannot afford to miss this twist. Stay glued, besties. The cold realization of the traitor's presence froze the marrow in Arya's bones. The terminal's rhythmic blink was a heartbeat, a warning, a ticking clock. She looked at Ju-won's face, softened by sleep, and Daehyun's hand, still possessively anchored to hers. These men were the architects of her kidnapping, the kings of a dark world, but in this moment, they were vulnerable. And she was the only one awake to see the blade coming for their throats. Gently, with the precision of a thief, Arya disengaged from their warmth. She slid out from between them, her feet hitting the cold marble floor with barely a whisper. She grabbed the terminal, her fingers flying across the keys to trace the signal. It wasn't just coming from the villa. It was coming from the floor directly below them. The security hub. Arya. The voice was a low, dangerous vibration. She spun around to find Daehyun sitting up, his obsidian eyes fully alert, as if he had never been asleep. Beside him, Ju-won stirred, his hand instinctively reaching for the firearm tucked under his pillow. Don't make a sound, Arya hissed in Korean, her Busan accent coming out in a sharp, commanding rasp. She held up the screen. Your Uncle Kang has a signal inside this house. The security hub has been compromised. The twins were off the bed in a single, fluid motion. The predatory grace they shared was terrifying to behold. Ju-won was already pulling on a tactical vest, his face hardening into the mask of the Syndicate Dawn. Daehyun took the terminal from her, his brow furrowing as he analyzed the data. He's not just jamming us, Daehyun whispered. He's rerouting the villa's biometric sensors. In 5 minutes, the system will report that we've all been flatlined. The guards outside will think we're dead and move in to secure the property. It's a coup. The timer, Ju-won said, looking at Arya. If the system thinks you're dead, the kill switch triggers. Our entire digital empire vanishes in 300 seconds. I can bypass it, Arya said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. But I need to get to the main server in the basement. I have to physically bridge the connection. Ju-won grabbed her by the waist, pulling her flush against his tactical vest. He pressed a small, sleek pistol into her hand. Do you know how to use this? My father taught me, she said, checking the safety. He said never to aim at what you don't intend to destroy. Ju-won smirked, a flash of his dark charm breaking through the tension. God, I love this woman. Focus, Ju-won, Daehyun snapped, though he reached out and squeezed Arya's shoulder, a silent gesture of solidarity. We move now. Marcus and the Loyalists are stationed at the North Gate. Everyone inside this wing is a potential target. They moved through the darkened hallways like shadows. The villa, which had felt like a sanctuary an hour ago, was now a labyrinth of lethal intent. As they reached the grand staircase, the first shots echoed through the foyer. The glass walls of the rock garden shattered, raining diamonds of light onto the floor. Go! Ju-won roared, shoving Arya toward the service elevator while he spun around the corner, his weapon barking twice. 2 men in tactical gear fell before they could even raise their rifles. Arya and Daehyun dived into the elevator. The descent felt like it took a lifetime. When the doors opened to the basement, the air was thick with the hum of cooling fans and the scent of ozone. The server is at the end of the hall, Daehyun said, his gun raised. Stay behind me. They were halfway there when a figure stepped out from the shadows. He was older, dressed in a traditional silk vest that looked out of place among the high-tech racks. Uncle Kong. He wasn't holding a gun, he was holding a remote detonator. Daehyun, the old man said, his voice smooth and cold. You always were the smarter twin. But you were always too soft for the crown. Taking in the daughter of a traitor? Allowing a woman to hold the keys to our bloodline? Your father would be disgusted. My father is dead because of men like you, Uncle, Daehyun said, his aim unwavering. Men who value a ledger more than loyalty. I don't want the ledger, Uncle Kang sneered, his eyes drifting to Arya. I want the board wiped clean. When this bunker explodes, the world will think the twins and their little pet died in a tragic accident. I'll be the only Kang left to pick up the pieces. The timer is tied to my heart. Arya stepped out from behind Daehyun, her voice echoing in the server room. If you kill me, the syndicate dies with me. Your money, your routes, your power, it all turns to zero. I've spent 70 years in the dirt, girl, the uncle spat. I'd rather be king of a graveyard than a servant in your new world. His thumb moved toward the button. Bang. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. A single red bloom appeared in the center of Uncle Kang's forehead. He collapsed, the detonator clattering to the floor. Arya stood with her arm extended, the pistol smoking in her hand. Her face was a mask of cold, Busan fury. I told you, she whispered. I don't aim at what I don't intend to destroy. Besties, the twins are safe, but the war for the Kang Syndicate has just officially turned into a bloodbath. Arya has officially drawn blood. She is no longer a waitress. She is a mafia queen. Subscribe now and hit that like button if you think Arya is the baddest female lead in YouTube history. Daehyun stared at Arya, a look of profound, terrifying respect in his eyes. He didn't say a word. He simply walked to the console and began the bypass. The system is reset, he muttered after a few feverish seconds. The kill switch is dormant. We're live. Ju-won burst into the room, his clothes stained with soot and blood. He looked at the body on the floor, then at the smoking gun in Arya's hand. He walked over to her, his movement slow, and took the weapon from her shaking fingers. You okay? He asked, his voice unusually gentle. Arya looked at her hands. They were trembling now, the reality of what she'd done finally catching up. I had to, she whispered. He was going to kill us all. Ju-won pulled her into a fierce embrace, his heart beating a frantic rhythm against her cheek. I know. And you did it perfectly. Daehyun stood up from the console, his face illuminated by the green system clear light. It's not over. Uncle Kong was just the figurehead. The board of directors and Pangeo, the men who funded him, they're already moving their assets. If we don't strike now, we'll be fighting 1,000 fires across the country. Then we strike, Arya said, pulling away from Ju-won and wiping a stray tear from her cheek. I have the data. I know where they hide their money. I know who they love and who they fear. She looked at the twins, the two men who had kidnapped her, terrified her, and ultimately awakened the dormant fire in her soul. You said you would never set me free. Fine. But if I'm staying, we're doing this my way. No more trafficking. No more Project Harpy. We burn the old guard to the ground and build something that doesn't require us to look over our shoulders every night. Ju-won smiled, a dark, wicked grin. Whatever the queen wants. We need to get to Pangeo, Daehyun said, checking his watch. The board meets at dawn. We have 3 hours to cross the country. Then let's go, Arya said. I have a few words I've been saving for the men who used my father. The helicopter cut through the pre-dawn mist of Gyeonggi province, the lights of Pangeo Techno Valley appearing below like a sprawling, neon circuit board. This was the brain of South Korea, where the nation's digital future was forged, and where the Kang Syndicate's most refined monsters hid behind glass and steel. Arya sat in the cockpit, the hum of the rotors vibrating through her bones. She was no longer the woman who had walked into the Velvet Grotto in San Francisco. She was dressed in a sleek, black-tailored suit, her hair pulled back into a severe, high ponytail, and her father's silver dragon ring glinted on her finger. Daehyun and Ju-won sat opposite her, checking their earpieces. They looked like gods of war preparing for a corporate takeover. The betrayal in the villa had stripped away the last of their patience. Tonight, the Kang name would either be purged or erased. The board is meeting on the 80th floor of the Kang Tower, Daehyun said, his voice calm over the comms. They think we're dead. They're currently voting to liquidate our personal assets and transfer the syndicate's control to a holding company controlled by the old guard. They're in for a hell of a surprise, Ju-won muttered, checking the magazine on his pistol. He looked at Arya, his obsidian eyes softening for a fraction of a second. Arya, once we step out of this chopper, there's no turning back. You're not just a witness anymore. You're the executioner. I stopped being a witness the moment I pulled the trigger in Busan, Arya replied, her voice steady. Let's finish this. The helicopter touched down on the rooftop helipad. The twins moved with lethal synchronicity, taking out the rooftop security before the men could even radio for help. They descended through the building like a virus, moving through executive hallways that smelled of expensive wax and betrayal. They reached the double mahogany doors of the boardroom. Arya could hear the muffled sound of a man's voice inside, arrogant, certain, and cold. To the memory of the twins, the voice said in polished, high society Korean. They were talented, but they lacked the vision to keep the bloodline pure. To a new era. Ju-won didn't knock. He kicked the doors open with a thunderous crack. The 12 men around the massive glass table froze. In the center stood Chairman Oh, a man whose face was a map of 70 years of greed. He dropped his champagne flute, the crystal shattering on the floor. Impossible, Oh breathed. Death is a difficult thing to get right when you hire amateurs, Chairman Dae-hyun said, stepping into the room, his gun leveled at the chairman's heart. You're late for the vote, Ju-won added, his smirk a promise of violence. But don't worry. We brought a new agenda. Arya stepped forward, the blue light of the tablet in her hand casting a sharp glow on her features. She began to speak in that low, haunting Busan dialect, the rough tongue of the streets echoing in the halls of power. My name is Arya Thompson. I am the daughter of Mitch Park. And I am the reason every single one of you is going to prison tonight. Chairman Oh sneered, regaining his composure. A waitress? You think a few files can take down the men who built this country? You're a footnote, girl. I'm the headline, Arya countered. She tapped a command on the tablet. Behind the chairman, the massive 100-inch presentation screen flickered to life. It didn't show stock prices. It showed the live internal servers of the National Tax Service and the prosecutor's office. I've just uploaded the unredacted files of Project Harpy to every major news outlet in Asia and the West. I've also sent the digital signatures of every board member here to the International Criminal Court. The men at the table began to scramble, their phones buzzing in unison. The panic was instantaneous. You've destroyed the syndicate, one board member screamed. You've wiped out billions. I've wiped out a cancer, Arya said, her eyes locked on Chairman Oh. My father was a monster because you made him one. He sold those women because you told him it was business. Well, business is over. The Kong twins aren't your puppets anymore. They are the new architects. And they don't work with traffickers. Chairman Oh reached for a hidden panic button under the table, but a shot from Dae-hyun's suppressed weapon took out the electronics before he could touch it. We gave you a chance to retire gracefully years ago, Dae-hyun said, his voice like falling ice. Now you'll retire in a cell. The sirens began to wail in the streets of Pangeo, 80 floors below. The twins stood guard as the specialized units they had secretly coordinated with, the ones not on the syndicate's payroll, burst into the room. One by one, the titans of the old underworld were led away in handcuffs. Chairman Oh looked at Arya as he was being hauled off. You think you've won? You're tied to them now. You're one of us. No, Arya said, leaning in close. I'm the one who survived you. As the room cleared, leaving only Arya, Ju-won, and Dae-hyun, the silence was profound. The morning sun was finally breaking over the horizon, painting the skyscrapers of Pangeo in shades of rose and gold. Ju-won walked over to Arya, his face smeared with the grime of the night, but his eyes were filled with a raw, undeniable heat. He took her hand, his thumb tracing the dragon ring. It's over. The old guard is gone. The syndicate is ours to rebuild. Is it worth it? Arya asked, looking out at the city. All this blood. Dae-hyun joined them, standing on her other side. He looked exhausted, but for the first time, the coldness in his gaze had thawed into something resembling peace. It's worth it because for the first time in 30 years, we aren't looking over our shoulders at our own family. We're looking at a future we actually want to live in. He turned her to face them both. The two brothers, identical in beauty, lethal in nature, and completely devoted to the woman who had brought them to their knees. You said you would never set me free, Arya reminded them, a small, tired smile playing on her lips. We lied, Ju-won whispered, his hand sliding to her waist. You're free to go anywhere in the world, Arya. You have the money, the identity, and the power. We won't stop you. Arya looked at Ju-won, then at Dae-hyun. She thought about her life in San Francisco, the invisibility, the loneliness, the fear of her father's past. Then she looked at the two men who had seen her fire, who had shared their empire with her, and who had stood between her and a bullet. "And if I choose to stay?" Arya asked. Daehyun reached out, his fingers brushing a stray hair from her forehead. "Then you won't just be our partner. You'll be our heart. We'll build a new kind syndicate. One that protects the people our fathers exploited. One that belongs to us." Ju-won leaned in, his lips inches from hers. "We'll never set you free, Arya, because we'll be too busy spending the rest of our lives making sure you never want to leave." Arya closed the distance, kissing Ju-won with a passion that was 6 months in the making. When she pulled back, she turned to Daehyun, who met her with a kiss that was deeper, more certain, a promise of stability in their chaotic world. They stood there at the top of the world, 3 souls forged in darkness, watching the sun rise over a Korea that was no longer their prison, but their kingdom. The waitress was gone. The daughter of the traitor was dead. In her place stood a woman who had looked into the obsidian eyes of the Mafia and found her own reflection. "The timer is still running," Arya whispered against Ju-won's lips. "Good," he laughed. "I like knowing my heart depends on yours." As they walked out of the boardroom, hand in hand, the shadows of the past finally dissipated. They had burned the world to find each other, and in the ashes, they had found something rare. They had found loyalty. They had found love. And they had found a voice that would never be silenced again. Thank you for being part of this love journey. This is the end of Arya's story, but it's just the beginning of our storytelling family. If you love this Afro-Korean Mafia epic, please subscribe now and hit that like button. Comment forever to celebrate Arya's victory, and don't forget to check out our other stories on the channel. We have more unforgettable romances and dark twists waiting for you. Share this with a friend who needs a story that proves love is the ultimate power. Until next time, stay beautiful, stay fierce, and remember, some cages are worth staying in. Would you like me to start a new story for you? Suggest a female lead's name you would like me to use in the comments section.